Welcome to this professional learning short for pupil support staff from the Scottish Attainment Challenge team. Just as the role of support staff can vary, so can the name. Some support staff are referred to as classroom assistants, pupil support assistants and learning assistants, to name but a few. For the purpose of this professional learning session, we will use the term pupil support staff. My name is Jane Gray and I'm an Attainment Advisor from Education Scotland, supporting the Scottish Attainment Challenge. The mission of the Scottish Attainment Challenge is to use education to improve outcomes for children and young people impacted by poverty, with a focus on tackling the poverty-related attainment gap. This short is to help pupil support staff become more informed about relational approaches and how these can be used to tackle the poverty-related attainment gap. The aims of this session are to consider the history of behaviour management changing to relational approaches in Scotland, why relational approaches are so important, what different relational approaches there are, and what you can do to improve relational approaches in your work, and to think about what all that means for children living with poverty and disadvantage. Before we launch into these 4 points, I'm going to set the context of this approach through the Scottish Attainment Challenge lens and look briefly at poverty and the effects of poverty. There are many reports which have highlighted the effects of poverty on the life chances of our children and young people, and among them is the Growing Up in Scotland report, which analysed 3,500 responses from the Growing Up in Scotland longitudinal study, and which tells us that in Scotland, by the age of 5, the gap between children from the most advantaged and most disadvantaged families is already 6 to 13 months in problem-solving ability and 11 to 18 months in expressive vocabulary, and that children with low attainment are 3 times more likely to be unemployed by the age of 22, twice as likely to be working part-time, more likely to earn less, and more likely to work in entry-level employment. This is backed up by the attainment data that we have gathered across Scotland for many years now, which shows that children living in the most disadvantaged areas have the poorest attainment. Further impacts of poverty include on health, that children from low-income families are more likely to suffer poor physical and mental health, be at increased risk of severe long-term and life-limiting illness, live in poor quality unheated housing and have fewer safe places to play, experience problems with nutrition which can lead to childhood obesity. And as well as the facts we've already seen, children from low-income families compared to high-income families are 4 times more likely to be excluded, 4 times less likely to read well, and 3 times less likely to enter higher education, training and employment. This sets the scene for us to think about how important it is to ensure that children and young people have positive experiences in school which lead to improvements in life outcomes, especially where they live in poverty and with disadvantage. The relationships that they make at school are key to this. So let's have a look at relational approaches to supporting children and young people. You will already know that for your work to be successful in school, you need to build good relationships with children and young people first. You have a unique opportunity to build relationships which help children to feel safe and included in school in a way that teachers often can't. My experience as a head teacher showed me that pupil support staff were often the most crucial and consistent relationship that a child could have, and often continued year on year, whereas the relationship with their teacher lasted for a year or sometimes 2. The relationships that you build with children and young people in school are very important. So what is the Scottish relationship-based approach? The Scottish approach to behaviour in schools has evolved significantly in the past 2 decades, from punitive discipline policies to a focus on building relationships and promoting positive, pro-social behaviour. This shift in focus to relationship-based approaches has been embedded systematically into curriculum delivery and education-related policies and guidance, including those that promote attendance and participation, and those that reduce barriers to learning and exclusion. The relationships that you make need to be built, nurtured, and repaired when necessary. And you are the person who can support our young children and young people to build, nurture, and repair relationships in school. How much more important is that when children and young people come from a home in poverty and living with disadvantage? Adopting relational approaches at a whole school level takes time. Time for staff to develop a shared understanding of the underpinning principles. Time to learn, practice, and refine the skills and strategies to support the approach. Time to become confident and consistent in their use. They're not a quick fix. Learners and parents also need time to become familiar with and trust the relational approaches being used. Relational approaches are expectations and values based and shared. They are proactive and preventative. They have a consistency of approach, not response, and that can be difficult to establish consistency. And they are responsive to individual need. So, why do we need to keep refocusing on relationships? The views of the adults who work in school about how to promote positive behaviour and how to provide the consistency that children and parents need can be extremely different. Personal views can range from those valuing systems that rely on control and compliance, that have strict rules in order to avoid sanctions, to those that more closely align with what we've already been talking about that well-being, the positive relationships, and an inclusive ethos and culture to make the foundation for good, positive learning outcomes. And the people at the centre of this, the children and young people, tell us they need the support that they receive to be consistent from all the people who work with them. This is an area that we need to revisit frequently to ensure that we can be as consistent as possible. Now that children's rights are enshrined in Scottish law, it's even more important that we listen to what they are telling us. Developing good relationships and positive behaviour in the classroom, playground, and wider community is essential for creating the right environment for effective learning and teaching. Where children and young people coming from poverty and disadvantage feel included, respected, safe, and secure, and when their achievements and contributions are valued and celebrated, they are more likely to develop self-confidence, resilience, and positive views about themselves. This applies equally to the staff in the learning community. All adults in an educational establishment should know why relationships are important in creating a positive learning environment and take personal responsibility for building and maintaining relationships with learners, parents, and each other. In this way, the adults can model the behaviour they would like to see. In turn, this supports resilience and enables children and young people to become more confident and expect better outcomes. Given the facts about poverty we have already looked at, building good, healthy relationships in school is crucial for those living in poverty to have better life outcomes. So, what are the relational approaches that are so important for our children and young people living with poverty and disadvantage? You may already know about some of these. We have rights-based approaches, like rights-respecting schools, class charters. We have whole school nurture, where we accept all behaviour as communication. We have compassionate and connected classrooms and schools, helping us to consider the science and attachment theory. We have trauma-informed approaches, where we're trauma-sensitive and help children to self-regulate, then relate to them, and only once that has happened can we reason with them. We have restorative approaches that seek to find out what happened and how it can be repaired and are solution-focused. We have 20 years of relationship-based policy and guidance. We have many resources and professional learning to support awareness raising and implementation of these approaches, and all the experiences of COVID have told us how good relationships with children are necessary for them to stay engaged with education. And that when poverty is a barrier, how much more important and powerful these approaches can be. So what can you do and who can you be to help with this? Well, you can be the person that shows unconditional positive regard to learners, accepting and supporting them exactly as they are without evaluating or judging them. You can understand and respond to behaviour in a respectful, child-friendly and holistic way, considering the individual in the context of their family, community and culture. You can proactively develop responses to support learners' well-being and learners who may be at risk of disengaging or being excluded. You can actively listen, with purpose, to children and young people. You can focus on inclusion, well-being, and addressing barriers to learning rather than punitive processes. You can help children and young people to be aware of and understand the impact of their actions and behaviours. And you can show acceptance and not judge families who live in poverty and with disadvantage. So what else can you do? You can undertake professional learning. There are now a few specific resources aimed particularly at pupil support staff which will help inform and develop your practice. This one from the Education Endowment Fund has a very good offer called Making Best Use of Teaching Assistants. Although it's based on the English model, it's very valuable and relevant to our Scottish context. You can also access the Pupil Support Staff Professional Learning Framework on the Education Scotland Hub. You can see the levels are informed, skilled and enhanced. The Pupil Support Staff Professional Learning Framework has been designed with 3 levels, and this new framework includes activities and resources in a variety of accessible formats, which will continue to be developed. The informed level provides universal support. The skilled level gives additional and targeted support, and the enhanced level is intensive, specialised and context-specific support. This brings us to the end of this Scottish Attainment Challenge short on how pupil support staff can make use of relational approaches to support children and young people living in poverty and to help tackle the poverty-related attainment gap. You may find these links useful for additional research and professional learning. Pupil support staff are crucial to developing good, healthy relationships for our children and young people living in poverty and with disadvantage. Thank you for listening.